Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my utter delight to welcome on the show Mr. Sopnendu Mohanty, who is the Chief Fintech Officer by the Monetary Authority of Singapore and Singapore right here. Sopnendu is a rock star, and he has single-handedly really built out the whole fintech ecosystem, the very word fintech, to give it prominence from just pure academic institutions to really making it a reality has been done by Sopnendu. And so I'd like to start, Sopnendu, welcoming you on the show. This show is done by FinBlue Center of Excellence by STPI. Delighted to have you here. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi, Puneet. Good to catch up with you. So good to see you and good to be part of this program. It has been an interesting year for all of us last year. So we are in the starting of the year reflecting on many things what happened last year. Hopefully 2021 becomes an exciting exciting year for all of us, and we can get back to life as it seems to be changing very fast. Hopefully we'll see a great 2021. Now, I think we can start with a big picture if that's what you want, but let me hear from you what we're going to discuss, and then we can go step by step.
I think this has been a very exciting journey that you've undertaken, Sopnendu, really from 2015 to 2020. It's been a remarkable journey. You have really conceptualized the whole notion, added tremendous amount of assets to the whole fintech ecosystem. So maybe that's a good idea. Start from the very beginning. Tell us how did you conceptualize it, how the journey went along, and what's been happening along the way.
I'll take 5 years from 2015 to 2021. 20. I think that's August is the 2020 August is the completion of 5 years for this remarkable journey we had in Singapore. Well, when I started this job at MAS in 2015, we really didn't had a blueprint to start with. It was a period of discovery. It was a period of understanding what to do, how to bring the ecosystem, how to move about, and building what it seems to be a largely a successful effort where we could bring the global community to Singapore to drive this fintech agenda. When we started the journey in 2015, our MD Ravi Menon gave a speech a month before I joined, where he laid out a kind of a strawman plan of Singapore as a smart nation, which our Prime Minister had laid out by 2020 then. And within that smart nation framework, there was a need to build a smart financial center. And the smart financial center was something we started putting together as a frame and see what can be built so that we can call ourselves a smart financial center by 2020. Now, there were many ways to go about and doing that plan, but we started, thankfully in hindsight looks a great decision, is to start building what we call as the fundamental ecosystem, which will help us to build this 5-year goal for us. So Singapore can be called as a smart financial center. And when I say ecosystem, it means build the community, build the infrastructure, build the policies which can support this new way of doing finance, and then find a way to build on top of that. So the first thing we looked at when we looked at this whole space is go around and figure out what Singapore can do different, given we are a small market. When I was to go around to many countries, the investors especially were telling me what fintech can happen in Singapore. You are a country with 5 million people. When you talk about fintech, the first thing the investor thinks is that you should have a lot of people to offer financial services. As you know, by around 2010, when this whole journey started, the fintech as a concept started, it was all about helping to change the way people think about lending, helping to improve the payment system, bringing financial inclusion as a big part of the discussion, So it is about extending the ability for a larger population to be participating in the banking sector and the unbanked population. So Singapore being highly banked, a small country with 5 million people, really it was hard to believe that what can we do more in this space when it comes to fintech. So we came back after meeting many investors around the world, many policymakers. So we decided at the onset that Singapore will focus on what we call as the backbone of fintech, or the B2B, the business to business side of the fintech, which means anything happens out of Singapore will be the backbone of a fintech which is serving the larger Asian population. So we kind of position ourselves as a hub, as a gateway for fintechs to go and build the solution and services for the Asian market. So the first thing is we designed a process where we became the hub, and the hub is about bringing the bright entrepreneurs to Singapore, providing them the policy support, providing the necessary risk capital, the necessary human resource which is required to set up the shop in Singapore, and also build that outfit so that they can start building the business plans for Asia. So that was the first piece. But we also thought that Singapore can become a hub for experiments, because one thing this sector is highly regulated. So you got to figure out the right policy, the right regulation, the optimal regulation on which these new models can operate. And Singapore can be a great place to experiment these new ideas. So we started looking at what are the possible regulatory changes we can bring so that these new models can start operating, testing it out of Singapore, and before they expand beyond Singapore. So we brought in concept like regulatory sandboxes. We also start looking at what are the policies which we can start modifying as a response to this new way of doing business. For example, our payment regulation. It took us 3 years to completely overhaul the payment regulation to a modular structure, to an activity-based regulation, where as you are doing a particular activity, you are proportionately regulated for that particular activity, rather than the whole regulation burden on one piece of activity. So that was quite a different way of thinking about regulation, where you're breaking down the regulation to small chunks and applying them in a modular approach, and making the balance between regulation and activity far more optimal in that way. So that's as an example of how regulation we started looking at regulation as a way to improve the way we build financial services. There are many such on the capital market side, on the lending side, on the peer-to-peer lending side, on the insurance distribution side. We went across different asset class and started looking at how to fine-tune the regulation as a way to respond to these new models, new business models coming in the sector. So that's on the regulation side. We also moved, which is very critical for the ecosystem, was to build the talent pool, because ultimately we need extremely bright, skilled manpower to drive innovation. So we looked at our curriculum in our polytechnics, in our universities. We started putting together different programs so that we can improve the skill set of the sector, so that we can have access to good talent. In fact, we looked at the existing financial sector, the bank, the incumbent segment, and figure out how to upskill them so that they can also be part of this whole journey. Now, one significant shift we had from the fintech which was happening in US and in Europe was the way we pursued fintech in Asia. Unlike in US, where fintech was primarily a competitor to the incumbent, in Singapore we started thinking them as part of the shift, which means they'll come as more collaborator, as a more partners who can work together to build a much better financial architecture of future. So in Singapore, especially, and now abroad in Asia, the fintechs here are largely perceived as partner, as a collaborator, and that allows that synergy to be far more optimal as we bring fintechs and the incumbent together. And that's the reason why the market which grew out of Asia was primarily a B2B market, where the fintechs and the banks were far more collaborating than in other parts of the world, which I think today is largely a successful model, where fintechs are part of the banking thinking of, or financial sector thinking of as partners. So skill set, talent development, bringing the banks together with the fintech was the second focus area for us. We actually have the largest number of innovation labs in Singapore compared to any jurisdiction. As now, I think the count is correct, we have more than 30 labs of different financial institutions which are set up here to work with the fintech as the banks are building their own upgrades and own refresh of their own systems. Moving up the value chain is the ability to create risk capital, because fintechs need a lot of seed capital, a lot of early stage investment. We worked with a lot of investors, including yourself, where we brought them together and started showcasing the fintechs in Singapore, and what they're doing in Singapore and what they're doing outside Singapore in the Asian market. And we had deal Fridays, we had various roundtables, matching events where we brought investors together. In fact, I'm very proud to say that when I started the journey in 2015, a total fintech investment was around $20 to $25 million. Now this year, like 2020, end of 2020, despite COVID-19, we'll end up with $1.2 billion. It's quite a significant growth in investment within 5 years. So the investment part was the third leg of where we put a lot of focus. And the last piece is building the networking. And this is, I think, as the topic of today's discussion is international collaboration, because you cannot succeed by just doing good in your own jurisdiction. You need to be part of the larger network. And one of the challenges of fintech sector has been that almost 90% plus of fintech are successful within the domestic boundaries. Very few have succeeded from where they started outside the market. So that's an opportunity, and that's where I think a lot of us are focused on, that can we take the success story out of Singapore and start expanding to other markets. So networking was a big part of that puzzle. So we started thinking about how to build a platform which allows us to start telling the story and start bringing the global community together so that we can collaborate better. One example to that is the iconic Singapore FinTech Festival. And I'm sure we're going to discuss a lot on this particular festival, because it started as an experiment, and today it is actually the largest fintech festival in the world. And before COVID-19 came in, we had 60,000 people joining us from more than 130 countries. And during COVID-19, we did a hybrid model, 3.5 million viewers. We had 5 days event from 40 cities participating jointly in this massive 5 days exercise. And we had, we'll talk about it through our conversation later during this discussion. So FinTech Festival, in a way, was kind of a glue which brought every year the narrative together, the global collaboration together, the partnership together. So that truly helped us to create a massive scale up of the FinTech story, which we started in Singapore. And also the other part of the network is international collaboration. We have now close to 30 plus memorandum of understanding with different jurisdiction on the fintech collaboration, starting from policy alignment, starting from sharing information, doing cross-border projects, which actually helps to create that scale impact of what we do in Singapore. Examples like Project Ubin. It was the largest public-private experiment in this place of blockchain and digital currency, which is highly successful, and we've been running for 4 years, and it came to a closure last year. But that created a momentum for us to build Singapore as a hub for blockchain and digital currency. We also started talking of building payment connectivity. With India, we built our connectivity on the merchant payment side. We are in the process of launching our payment network connectivity with Thailand. So these are the other examples where you start delivering a promise of collaboration, not by talking, by building MOUs, but actually connecting systems, bringing global projects, bringing global partners, delivering products which truly reflect the globality of such collaboration. So that's the fourth leg. And to round it off, I think the most critical part always has been that how to sustain this. And to sustain this, you need to ensure that the policy stays always closely with the changing environment or the changing circumstances. We had to do a lot of policy shift and policy intervention during the COVID-19 crisis. The whole ecosystem could have collapsed during the crisis. So it is very important for policymakers to always respond as quickly as possible to changing the changing environment around the ecosystem. So policy response to crisis, to opportunities, to changing business models, and the speed at which we can respond became a critical part. To that, we created a Singapore FinTech Association, which gave us the feedback as we think about, as we continuously monitor this ecosystem. And we as policymakers stay on top of that as we respond to such crises. So I'm going to pause here, and what I've laid out a base framework of how we went about our last 5 years, and I have an acronym for this. We call INNER principle. I stands for innovation, N stands for network, E stands for ecosystem, and R stands for regulation. So the INER is our fundamental framework to build a globally collaborative international hub.
Very, very impressive, Sopnendu. This is, for many of our viewers who have not experienced it and who don't know about it, such a rich ecosystem where you have 30 plus labs that have participated. You have over $1.2 billion of capital that has gone into investment into this. And I know you talked about financial institutions. It's not just the large banks, but over 1,000 financial institutions have now participated in this. I'd like to actually go back to, and you touched upon some very, very interesting points. You talked about talent first and foremost. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that today we're facing as we're developing the ecosystem. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you're going about developing the talent, how you're helping participate both with the academia, as well as with the industry to develop talent so it's available as you move forward for the next 5 years of the fintech journey?
Puneet, that's a great question, because I'll say why. First thing, Singapore is challenged by the size itself, and we have a limited resource pool. I always start a talent discussion by saying that talent is not a zero-sum game, because you can't just artificially create more talent. It is there, and at any point of time, you have a limited resource. And as you develop good talent, you're not the only sector looking at the same set of people. Finance is one of the many sectors which is going after the best and brightest talent. Now, the challenge now, Puneet, has been that technology is the common thread of talent. Whether it is health sector, whether it's logistic or transportation, or you think about manufacturing, they all require technology-enabled talent. I think that has put a lot of constraint in this space. So our first response to talent is to widen the canvas of where to go and look for good talent. And the first thing we do, strangely, you would have thought that we would go to university, we'll go to existing workforce and reskill them and prepare talent. No, the first place we went to build talent is actually polytechnics, and which is equivalent in India, let's say, the diploma colleges. Or we also went further down, the ITES, which is in India, the equivalent is ITI, because we believe that these are the early stage talent which can be groomed and be equipped with skill set which can provide the wider base of the talent pool we want to develop to support the sector. So we went, for example, in our diploma institute, which is called the Polytechnic here, we went and changed the curriculum. We built a mentorship program where we got 100 plus experts and professionals to work with the students of Polytechnic, so that we can coach them so that they can get ready for the sector. So we went, that was the sector we started with. Then we went to universities. Then we looked at the curriculum. A lot of university required the curriculum itself to be changed so that they can create the right skill set for the college students to be ready for the sector when they come out of the college. That's almost like the basic fundamental upgrade we did on the curriculum, the base colleges and the universities and the postgraduates colleges. Then we looked at how do we attract people from non-financial sector who can be upgraded, upskilled, repurposed to respond to this sector. So we put a lot of programs, a lot of incentive programs, a lot of salary offset programs to support the talent from non-financial sector to come to the sector and get upskilled and reskilled so they can support us. And also the third leg is look at the existing sector, the financial sector, because as technology was getting adopted more and more, there was a lot of redundancy coming on the workforce. Can you reskill this redundant workforce and redeploy on the fintech sector? That was the third leg of that. And fourth is working with global talent, because we all strongly believe that Singapore should continue to be a place where global talent can come, participate, help the ecosystem to grow. Having talent level partnership with global ecosystem was the last piece of this framework, how we went about building the talent.
Wonderful, Pops. Pops, you.
So by the Puneet, we also last year we introduced a new institution called Asian Institute of Digital Finance, which will also go about building the future leaders in this sector. So I almost forgot that initiative which is started a few years back and finally got it out last year.
Oh, wonderful to hear that. I'm sure many in the audience would like to come and participate in that.
And I encourage them to join that institute, because this is almost half of the fintech will be from the Asian market.
I think it's a very innovative approach to get a very industry-specific and skill-based rather than just an academic-based education that you're providing. Very pragmatic and very pertinent to what's going on. I wanted to come back to one other point that you also mentioned, that you talked about the sandbox. Being a regulatory environment, obviously the institutions that use the technology coming out of it, the innovation coming out of it, are clearly sensitive to what kind of a backstop can be provided in terms of who is governing this, who's providing the compliance around this thing. So perhaps a little bit about the sandbox. And I do know that in fact, as early as 2 years ago, that you actually had one of your early sandbox participants actually got acquired, and perhaps maybe tell us a little about that as well, and the journey, either what's happening in the sandbox, and B, what can entrepreneurs, innovators look at post their life from the sandbox.
Puneet, I think before I explain what has happened in sandbox, let me give some definition of what sandbox actually means, because it can get very confusing. Typically, when people talk about sandbox, they talk about a regulatory machine where people go and put together the solution, and then there are exceptions which allows people to operate in this regulated environment. I think the answer is not that simple. There are two kinds of sandbox. There's a regulatory sandbox and there is a industry or a public sandbox. On the regulatory sandbox, we have typically participants who come to us and say that here is the regulatory challenges we are facing for this particular business model. We want to try it out, and we will look at and we will examine whether there is really a policy barrier for that idea. If it indeed there, then we'll adopt them within the sandbox framework, and then they will start running on a limited basis of that particular experiment. And just to give you a big difference between what you hear typically a sandbox in UK or other market, is the sandbox in Singapore, and the regulatory sandbox in Singapore is a production grade sandbox. What it means that anybody who participates in that sandbox must be running a production grade system. They must have real customer, and the transaction must be production grade. And to that, we as a regulator defined a constraint under which they can operate. A constraint can be the number of transactions, the total volume of transaction, and we can put other limits so that it doesn't create a risk when you're dealing with a new model. And that process runs for 6 months, or depending on how much time has been granted. And they come out of the sandbox if the experiment is successful. If there are risks which comes as part of the experiment, we got to find a way to mitigate those risks. That's how a regulatory sandbox operates. That is the reason why almost 95% of the sandbox applicants don't make it to regulatory sandbox, because out of the 95% who got rejected, almost 80% could not uh, explain why there's a policy issue for that idea. What I'm trying to say, Puneet, that there's a huge myth that there's a huge policy barrier in financial sector for any new business model. I have seen in my own sandbox experiment journey, almost 80% are actually pure misunderstanding of policy, and they think they cannot do it. So that's a good news in a way. It's not rejection, it's not a bad thing. It all says that you can do what you want to do without getting an exception from MAS. That's regulatory sandbox. The second is what we call as the public sandbox or an industry sandbox, and which we set up for those people who don't make it. They can try out in this public sandbox, because what essentially they're saying, there's a new technology way of doing certain thing, and that can be experimented, and then industry can get comfortable to adopt it. To allow them to participate in Sandbox, we created an API exchange where such companies can come and put their APIs, get the client, do the experiment, and that has been highly successful for us to divert those set of people who want to do experiment despite no policy barrier. So having this two sandbox as a frame, as an infrastructure was very, very critical component, was a big enabler for us to see the growth we saw in Singapore. So it's important for any market to have these two sandbox available for this sector to grow. And examples, as you said, there are examples which allowed people who graduated for sandboxes to not only raise more capital. We have now evidence to show that anybody who graduated from Sandbox, within the first 6 months, they have raised capital, definitely. Second thing, that they're also up for buyout. One example which you yourself articulated. But more heartening to me in the whole Sandbox journey is the kind of companies which came out. Almost half of the graduated candidate from the regulatory Sandbox are in the space of blockchain and distributed ledger, which clearly showed that the Sandbox worked for us to capture this new era, new technology, new business model, and a new way of doing finance. And to me, one way to understand the impact is that one example is bond e-value. It was a candidate in our Sandbox, and what they did, they were the first one in Asia who fractionalized bond for retail investors to buy bonds, which was otherwise difficult to buy because bond tickets are quite big. So examples like that truly makes us believe the Sandbox really helps the sector to not only improve and also innovate, also helps the policymaker to frame the right policy framework for this new experiments or new product to succeed in this market.
Now you talked about Ubin as well earlier on, and given that Bitcoin and distributed ledger is the topic du jour, I'd love to just get a few comments from you on that as well, on that initiative that you have done, and particularly in the context of cross-border, how do you see that evolving? Because the regulator's viewpoint is always very interesting, and in many constituencies, actually, it is touted as being, an antithesis to what regulator is trying to do. So your comments there, Sopnendu.
Now, this is a great question that, given the previous question was Sandbox, and we say there are a third part to experiments. One is I talked about the regulatory Sandbox. Then there's a public Sandbox called API Exchange. This is a third kind of experiment we do in this ecosystem, which I call is a program where the industry wants to do certain things. The regulators believe there is a certain value in doing this, but there's not enough, I'll say, incentive to go forward. So in the third kind of experiment, we as MAS introduce programs, and under the program, we pick up use cases and start bringing the industry together and start experimenting. Project Ubin was one of those. Why did we start Project Ubin? Because by 2016, Bitcoin, blockchain has become a very significant narrative globally. Now, for us to move forward, we need to create an inspirational project where we can rally everybody together, rally the ecosystem together under one iconic project and see we can move forward. So Project Ubin was created where we as regulator set up use cases. And what are the use cases? That we will use Project Ubin as a way to define how the future payment system will look like. Can we change the settlement system using distributed ledger? Can the central bank digital currency be the new way of doing wholesale banking? Can the distributed ledger help the resiliency of payment system? Can it help cross-border payments? So we put up use cases, and against use cases, we bought other central bank, private sector, banks together and start building a team who will write code and also build policy and an operational framework to run this piece of new technology. So it was a 5-stage project. And what came out of this program, I think in interest of time, is that we as regulator or policymaker understood this space very well. So now when we make policy, it is more thoughtful because we understand the technology. We understand how it can help to improve the system. Same time, the industry also created a spark to get new talent who could come and be part of the program, and they in turn inspired others to start developing the blockchain skills, blockchain technology skills we desperately needed in the sector. Today, I can say proudly, we have close to, I was told, 70 to 80 blockchain companies, and we have the largest concentration of blockchain companies in finance sector in Singapore. So this came as an impact of this Project Ubin. And guess what? We are the only, this program allows us to write program. And how many regulators will write piece of code to be put in a GitHub? So we do that as part of the program. And we bought other central banks, and we completed the 5-phase project by saying that no more experiment. We will start building the next production grade platform out of Singapore to show that DLT becomes part of the new payment infrastructure. And you know that towards the end of the year, last year, DBS announced their exchange, their digital currency exchange, digital token exchange. There are many private sector who started issuing bond on the DLT. Temasek and a couple of them came together to issue bonds, issue equity on the DLT ledger. Philippines Treasury issued their treasury on the DLT ledger. So Asia has seen a massive production grade examples of using blockchain as a way to do business, especially finance sector. China put close to $60 to $70 billion on trade finance on DLT. So you saw, so what you're seeing that having an experiment of the size of Project Ubin, it really catalyzes the whole sector to start thinking how to use this technology. So we are quite hopeful this year we'll see more examples of production grade blockchain and digital currency implementation as we speak.
Sops, before we move on to another topic, just a relevant topic here is that you're through building all the software, providing the marketplace, getting entrepreneurs to come together. And now these are production level systems. They are no longer proof of concepts or pilots anymore. You're obviously also collecting a lot of data, and there's a lot of work that's going on in data integrity and being able to provide that data. And I know, in fact, you have something called the Singapore Financial Data Exchange. Can you just speak a little bit about that, what that initiative is?
Yes, maybe I will first context here then, because this question has a deeper question also, because one of the things I spoke in my initial interview, my opening, is that infrastructure. Because for the sector to truly adopt fintech, we got to build world-class new modern infrastructure to recast the financial sector on this new system. First thing we did before we come to the SG Findex you asked about is we built a public infrastructure or eKYC on our MyInfo platform. As you know, onboarding customer in the banking sector is the most painful experience. The reason fintechs are so well loved because their onboarding is remarkable.
Yes.
But when the onboard customers is very painful. So first thing we did, we put a public eKYC infrastructure on top of our public data infrastructure called MyInfo, which is essentially a citizen data database on which citizens can authorize data for banks to pull and open accounts seamlessly within few minutes. That was built sometime middle of 2018. We also put together a payment system on top of our existing faster payment system what we call as pay now, where you and me can pay each other by just knowing a mobile phone number or a national ID. And in 3 clicks, I can send money, which is as simple as that. We also put together other small infrastructure which supported the sector to start riding on public rails so that it can be more efficient. As an extension to that, we also, as you rightly pointed out, data is a key part of the sector. And for data to be used thoughtfully with proper governance, proper accountability, proper risk framework, we needed to build a public rail which allows such data to be exchanged thoughtfully. As a response to that, we built something called what we call SG Findex, which is a public gateway where banks can move their data, where customers can pull their data from different banks and see in an aggregated view of all their financial holding and in a single point. They can choose any bank, but really the big picture behind, or the big thinking behind this is that we got to, as a public infrastructure, has to be built for certain area where there's a need for trust and governance. And data is a very sensitive area where we need to have such infrastructure. So this is just starting. We put together a public gateway. More data will come in future, but that becomes our key backbone as customers start having that ability to pull data and start using the data more efficiently for their own financial planning. So that was the genesis behind how SG Findex came about, because we had this desire to build public rails. And I say that for any ecosystem or any country to succeed in fintech, in the space of financial sector or fintech, they must have 4 fundamental infrastructure. They must have a trusted digital identity. They must have a trusted data system. They must have a trusted, highly efficient payment system. And the fourth piece is a very trusted consumer consent system, where you and me are empowered to share data based on our consent. And that's only where people can access data.
Wonderful. Sopnendu, we'd love to talk about so many things. And I know I see the clock ticking by. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about 2 things in this conversation today. One is really, because this is a cross-border conversation, you actually have taken on a very, very big initiative, which is, really business sans borders. So I'd love to talk about that. And then, of course, I'd like to end this conversation with a little more about the FinTech Festival. But let's talk about first the business sans borders, what that initiative is. And I know you have personally championed that, brought it to fruition. It's a 5-stage process that you've gone through. So I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Sure, Puneet. I think business and border is a great example to the topic we're discussing for collaboration, because you cannot have collaboration unless it translates to real meaningful impact on people's life. As we know, during the crisis also, the sector which got affected are small businesses. And we all know statistically, any country you ask, 80 to 70% of the economy is driven by small businesses. And for small businesses, finance and credit is a significant part of their input, which they need to have to succeed. So as a response to that, we created something called Business Sans Border. The product name is called Pushkarna, which is essentially is a public rail, or it's kind of a private rail now, where businesses come together to do 3 things. It's a platform which allows small businesses, whether you're a buyer or a supplier, wherever you are sitting, can find a match for yourself. Once you have a match, you can start executing a trade. And when you execute trade, there are a few things you do. You look for finance. The platform allows to instantly look for people who are willing to finance the trade. You're looking for logistic company at the most efficient logistic company. There are logistic services which are available who can come and help you to support that. Escrow services, licensing, goods and goods certification, legal services. So there are a whole set of basic services which facilitates a trade once a match is done. And the third leg is how to build some kind of experimental data set where different tools can be created, digital tools can be created for small businesses to adopt as they digitize themselves. One thing also we learned during the crisis that SMEs, when they come out of COVID-19, they are going to operate in a highly low touch and high-tech construct, which means they have to use digital tools as a way to do businesses. So having a platform like Pushkarna or Business Sans Border allows the trade, especially small business, to start connecting themselves, and hopefully that creates that digital platform for bringing businesses together to start in Asia and hopefully going beyond Asia with Africa and other market. And I'm very pleased to say that India has been a strong partner in that platform. TPCI, which is the Trade Promotion Council of India, is part of the program. Business Sense, the Global Linker is also another network in Singapore, in India, which is part of the network. We started executing trade between Africa, Philippines, Singapore, India, and I'm hoping that will grow as we upgrade the system, bring more partner. But what I want to leave the audience with one thing, that collaboration, when we talk, must not be only helping the fintechs to grow, also helping the industry, the ecosystem, the people at large to able to take advantage of this growing technology infrastructure, so that they can improve their own economic life as we look forward. And that's essentially is what we call as a business sense border of Proxtera. And I'm pretty sure more things are going to be discovered as we go forward.
Indeed, very, very impressive. Sopnendu, I want to come back to your face of, there's so much depth that you're doing, but really the face of all of this, where a lot of the world at large interacts with, is your iconic FinTech Festival. I've attended many FinTech festivals across the world, but this is something very, very unique in terms of scale, size, scope, participation, and impact. You've had state leaders, you had prime ministers, presidents, you have industry captains, CEOs of very, very large banks, institutions, etc. You've also had the royalty of the financial world. I remember in one of your events, Queen Maxima was there. So really would love to hear more about how did you go about doing this thing? And just for our viewers, I have to say this, that one of the highlights, a trivial portion of it, is the food there, which I know that you yourself personally curate. But I'd like to get back to really the whole FinTech Festival. How did the idea come about? And it has really grown to be a phenomenal, event.
For Puneet, people say that FinTech Festival is a conference, but I say it's a platform, because it's almost like a glue we create every year, where we bring the best brain together to just have some good 5 days of intellectual conversation, good food, as you mentioned, and some good networking opportunity. But really the larger purpose behind that was to have this ability to have this dialogue every year to talk about what is happening globally. Now, for a small country like Singapore to come to this stage of a large FinTech festival, sometimes even I also pinch myself, how did it come to this stage? I think there are many, even I'm also speculating, as in spite of being part of this journey, I think one of the reasons why it became highly successful is that we did not control the agenda. We wanted people to come and set the agenda, what they want to talk. In fact, the way we go about is to tell people what you want to discuss. What are the big topic you have in your mind, so we can discuss and bring the best brain together to debate. And we created this platform for many, many, many people who are not well known in the sector to come to Singapore, participate in the debate, speak about it in panels, and truly that become almost like a global annual destination, holiday destination for fintechs, financial sectors, thought leaders to come and have this open dialogue. So that's one phase. The second phase, we're quite bold to pick up topics which typically don't attract a lot of viewers. Things like inclusion, things like green finance, things like what you call SME digitization, because these are very mundane, these are not really attractive with fintechs or high tech or AI. But these are very sexy topics, I would say, but these are not that exciting that way. But we insisted that there has to be a value of people coming here in a true sense. So we introduced agendas like inclusion to be discussed. We introduced green finance as a way to think about how the future construct will look like. So having topics which is a broader, impactful, did help to enhance the image of Singapore FinTech Festival. So we can go on talking about it, but truly it has become iconic in a sense. It's not a festival which is about Singapore. It is a festival about the global FinTech. In fact, Singapore participation in the FinTech is quite a small percent. It's truly 130 plus countries contribution to make it to make it successful. And I really thank all of them to bring us to where we are. And I hope as we look forward, the festival will grow beyond and be part of the global community in a much larger forum.
Thank you. Thanks, Sopnendu. I'd love to go on, but I really, I know these platforms are never enough to kind of get to the full depth of it, but I hope that our viewers here have had an opportunity to get a little bit of sense of what you have done. You truly are a rock star. You've actually, I mean that, from ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange to having been out there in Times Square. I mean, you truly are really a rock star. And I think you're a global ambassador for the fintech world at large and have done tremendous amount of work in helping the agenda. Thank you very much. I feel very privileged to have you on our show. Really, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, Puneet. But before I go, I want to put a request to the organization which has done this conference that do join us in our journey. We have API exchange. I want to see whether we can collaborate with FinBlue as a partner so that together we can connect the dots and bring the fintech together to the global marketplace. I'm looking for such collaboration if it suits all of us to be truly global and collaborative in our effort to make fintech as the core engine for driving the future finance sector.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to do so. Thank you very much, Sopnendu. Real pleasure. Thank you.